Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have a very interesting show because I have a very good topic that I want to talk about today.
Ooh,
But before we do that, how are you doing? I
great,
haven't
buddy.
seen you in like 30 seconds,
It's been at least that long. In fact, it's only been 22 seconds at this
22
point.
seconds. But yeah, I was in and out of your live chat today, and every time I jumped in, you would say my name or
Dude,
like
I was doing my
something about the
best.
Burlage. It was pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
So before we go anywhere, while we're speaking of me, I think you should subscribe to me
Subscribe to Chance.
and Shaun, and then hit your notification bell. That way you get the emails saying, hey, Shaun and Chance are chatting. We should go listen.
Your day should start with an email to confirm that Chance is going to speak to you today.
That's a great, great day.
It's called routine.
Is it a
I
good
believe
day,
I was
though?
speaking about routine in my live IG chat today.
Speaking of routine, Winter Storm.
Morning, Winter.
See ya. So yeah, we do have a very good topic today. Any thoughts or anything? Oh, before we go, I tried the I Love Bombay today.
Oh, right. Yes,
with
we
the
have
grinder.
You've got your coffee grinder. That's right.
Yeah. And I spent a good number of hours researching how to utilize the V60 technique.
Oh, dude, you got the V60. That's a tough one to.
So I'm starting
You
in the
are
deep
just
water.
starting to understand.
And I think I screwed it up right off the bat, which
you probably did.
100%.
Yeah. Even people who have been in the game way longer than you have screw up the V60.
So yeah, but I had my notebook beside me. I wrote down my amounts, my time it took for it to brew, my thoughts on it, and did a whole little note sequence as for day one.
Nice.
And now I'm gonna move on to.
So how bad did you pooch it?
I think I had too much ground.
So you remember how much you ground?
I did 16-1, and it was it came out to 28 grams to about 500.
So you ground up
28
28 grams. Okay, that's not like a big amount of coffee.
It was quite strong. So I was like,
oh, right. Right.
So it could be that
Oh, hang on a sec. Strong. What does that mean to you?
Strong. It was a very large flavor. Like it hit kind of everywhere in my mouth. And the
that's actually called coffee.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. So what?
And by strong, you mean like didn't taste like just hot brown?
Yes. Yeah, it was very specific.
Not hot brown.
I did. Carl, morning to you. Good to see you. Checking in from Chatham, I think. Is that how you
Chatham?
Chatham. Yeah. It's those English words that are like this long, and you say Burberry. Kind of thing.
Chatham. Welcome to the chat.
Indeed. So I did notice, though, as it developed, as it started to cool, it had initially it was like a sour kind of flavor to it, and then I realized that was more of like a zesty, like if you were to take like a lemon zest,
like a bit acidic,
and kind of chew on it, that kind of stuff. So I've been playing around with the concepts of like how to describe it and jotting it down, that kind of stuff.
I mean, acidity is a notable quality in a good coffee. And so the idea being that you can enhance or decrease the acidity based on your brewing temperature, of course, all your ratios, your technique, and etc. But you should have some acidity in your coffee to counterbalance some of the sweet notes, some of the etc. You know.
Well, I got lots of practice to do. I got lots of time to take and really work it out. I think I'm using the Crystal Eye, the Time More Crystal Eye for the V60 technique, and it is. I did a whole bunch of research on YouTube and watched how to do it and like make sure that I was doing it. I actually had a video of the technique while I was doing it.
Dude, I've done the exact same thing when I was first getting my coffee nerdery on. And I mean, good on you. because you're doing it right. I mean, you're engaging deeply into the process. Are you learning?
Oh yeah.
Is it exciting?
It's quite interesting. I think I'm gonna start. My second one. I'm gonna do a little bit less.
That's
So
what I was going to recommend to you. Is the key word to me was you are practicing, and to practice more, you need to do it more.
yeah,
And therefore, instead of just doing one big coffee per day, do two smaller coffees per day.
yeah. That's what my thought is right now. Is that I'm gonna
Mm.
do maybe like like 16 grams to like 250
Yeah,
mils of water. Like
that's right.
just really cut down the ratios.
That's right.
Practice the technique. Get used to the bloom and all of the little pieces in there, like the
That's
stir and
right.
the swirl and all the stuff.
100%.
So
Yeah.
it's coming. It's coming. But I
Yeah,
did
good for
notice
you.
the one thing I did really notice actually was there's a vast difference between when it's hot, when it's first
Mhm.
brewed and it's hot versus when it becomes kind of tepid. Not quite room temperature, but like
Right.
warm, but not like.
That's right.
And then as it cools, that acidity like comes right up. And I was like,
What'll happen is every good coffee that's well roasted, well extracted, every good coffee will morph in the cup through a
mhm.
thermal decline.
It's there's quite a bit. It was kind of hilarious. My wife was making fun of me. We went to one of her friends puts on a poker night,
Mm.
and we were like, she invited me over, and I was like, yeah, sweet, let's do this. And I got there, and I had just ordered the grinder. So
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I was like excited and talking to people, and I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I just
Let
ordered
me
this
tell you
grinder.
all about grinders.
No, I wasn't like that, but Amber was making fun of me, and she was like, "Oh yeah, ha, 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 you just spent a whole bunch of money on a grinder." And they were like, "Well, what's a whole bunch of money?" And I'm like, It's like $500 for a grinder." And they was like, and I'm like, "That's just entry level stuff. Like,
That is,
I'm
yeah.
not even into the game yet."
That's right.
Yeah, so I bought my first pair of skates, kind of deal. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
they're
for
okay.
sure. But here's the thing, like the difference between having we'll call it an entry level grinder, though it's not. I would
Yeah,
call it mid-level,
okay.
consumer mid-level, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think that's a more fair title. The difference is that the grinder that you just bought is a set of skates
Mm,
for your first day of skating on the hockey rink
yeah.
versus the people that you were visiting for the poker night.
Mm-hmm.
They were all gonna go join you on the hockey rink with no
With
skates.
those skates. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How was the game? I don't know, I
Uh,
kept falling on my ass, it wasn't that fun.
it was super slippery out there.
Really slippery. Every time I go, it's always slippery and
Yeah.
not so much fun. Buy a good grinder.
Yeah. It's quite amazing. I had a bag of you're gonna love this. It's a vanilla hazelnut
Oh, no,
coffee
you didn't. You broke in your grinder with that atrocity?
from Costco.
Oh, dude.
But here's the deal. I didn't use any of that. So I ran it through, as you said, just to
Thank
use on
goodness.
regular coffee. And I ran 10, 11 ounces worth, just ran through it.
Mm,
And then I went out and got your coffee, the out of
mm,
Bombay, and then I was like, okay. And I really made sure that there was nothing else in it. Knocked that out a whole bunch of times, made sure that
mm.
it was nice and clear, and then started the whole process. And it was pretty
Do
cool. I gotta say, I
do you
enjoyed it.
know, I've gone to places, where I'll look at a grinder and think, "Are you kidding me? I've gotta be here for a week? There's no way." So I'll just grab some minute rice,
Mm,
throw it in the grinder, run minute, rice through the grinder, and what that does is it pulls off all of the rancid oils
mm.
that are on the burr,
Right,
on the
because it's a
grinder.
desiccant, right? It's
That's right, that's right.
removes
It
moisture.
once it's powderized or pulverized by the grinder, it'll start absorbing the, rancid oils that are all throughout the
Mm,
mechanism and
that
throughout
makes
the
a lot of
chute
sense.
and etcetera, and so it it it'll change the quality of your coffee, even if you've got the cheapest of cheap grind. I'm not talking about blade grinders.
Yeah,
Those are an abomination.
Yeah.
I'm talking about cheap burr grinders. If you've got like $100 burr grinder or an $80 burr grinder at home, and your coffee's not tasting great for some reason, and you don't know why, because your grinder has been getting worse and worse tasting over the last 12 years,
Mhm.
throw some minute rice in it.
Mm. Is specifically minute rice, or is it just any kind
Yeah,
of white
yeah.
rice?
Yeah, you don't want regular, white rice because regular rice is really hard.
Mm.
Minute rice has been, I think, is it parboiled, or I forget what the term is, but it's been processed so that it is, way more fragile. It's
Right.
almost pre-cooked in a sense,
Mhm. Pre-cooked and then
but anyway,
dried kinda deal, yeah.
yeah, the actual unprocessed rice, for lack of a better term, is really quite hard, and your burrs they have a shelf life. I mean, every time you run beans through them, you're degrading them, so that razor sharp edge starts, kind of dulling off eventually. And so you wouldn't want to go out to your front yard, grab a handful of rocks and run them through your grinder, of
Mhm.
course. And so the same could be said of rice. That regular
Mm.
rice is just like a handful of gravel versus minute rice, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Well, no, that does make sense quite a bit actually. The fibers within the rice itself, like that, the
Mhm.
actual technically it's a seed, right?
Yeah, I think
I
so.
think. Um, but yeah, if that's not broke down through a
That's right.
previous cooking of some sort, they are rock hard. That
Oh, they're
makes sense.
friggin' hard, man. And
Yeah.
the idea being that a good grinder has a sharp blade because it makes nice, precise, clean cuts. Now,
Mhm.
someone wouldn't know it if they're not paying attention to detail. But if you will, now that you've paid a boatload of money to get a good grinder,
Mhm.
and now you'll be able to like look at your grind and think, oh, look at the consistency, the
That was the
uniformity,
exact thing I said this
right?
morning because
Yeah.
yesterday as I was running the 10 ounces through it, right there, the actual hopper on top can only take so much, and it's not 10
Right.
ounces worth, right,
That's
by
right.
any means.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, and so I was running multiple runs through it just over and over and over again, and every time I dump out the stuff that I had ground, I was like, man, that was like it's the exact same as the previous one, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
the exact
perfect.
same consistency as the previous one. Exactly, I was just like, man, I think I did 4 or 5 straight run throughs, and every single one of them was just perfect.
Yeah, and that grinder will get better over the next couple of weeks
Mhm.
as the mechanisms bed themselves in, as things settle in, as the burrs kinda like they'll take off the extremely razor sharp edge and just dull that down a little bit, and then it'll become like kind of standard for at least a year based on the
Mhm.
amount of coffee that you're gonna be putting through. So you're gonna get a better cup of coffee in a couple of weeks.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. This whole process is it's a learning experience, but
Mhm.
it's also bringing back little pieces of prior training and
Yeah, right.
little bits of experience, and being able to actually taste coffee. It's the same, almost the exact same process as tasting wine or whiskey,
Yeah, yeah.
or like, so the same system.
But
Which
here's the difference. Here's a really important difference on tasting wine. Um, you didn't have much to do with that process
no.
other than sip.
Hmm.
But when you're making a coffee, y you're like the guy. You're like the guy who is combining grapes
Yep.
to make the wine. And then once you've combined the grapes, you're now the guy who gets involved with before it gets put in the bottle. I mean, as a wine drinker, all you are is a dumb end user. You have to accept what you're given and you can't interrupt it in any way. I mean, by
Hmm.
dumb end user, I mean you've got nothing to do with
Yeah.
it. You simply accept what you're given. Whereas with coffee, that is absolutely not the case. What you're learning to do right now, I mean, before you weren't even like a you weren't even like a part-time egg flipper. Never mind getting close to being a chef. But now you're moving towards cooking, called
Hmm.
making coffee properly. And if you pay more attention and you really, and I know you will because you've already stated it, you're taking your notes. Now you're learning how to be a chef.
Mm-hmm. Getting each little piece of that, which is awesome. Bambi, good to see you, man. We're doing well. The one thing that I really noticed in the whole process of it is, first off, my scale is not as accurate as I would like it to be, so I'm gonna have to get a new scale.
So accurate, even if it's just accurate to 0.1 gram, that's enough.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually go in the decimals. It's just to the gram. So I need to get something that
Okay.
has a bit more consistency, because there is like
That's called forethought
Yeah.
before you purchase.
Yeah. I did not make that forethought direct, but coming from no scale to a scale, that's a step. So I'm working it. I'm just refining the process, right?
Well,
As I go along.
if only it was free.
If only it was free. It's not.
Not.
Although I did see some really cool scales that have like the timer built in and everything.
Yeah,
And
my
those are pretty
Hario
fancy.
scale.
Yeah.
That's so for my Hario switch. So my Hario switch is a little extraction device sits on top of my mug, but that sits on top of a Hario scale.
Mm-hmm.
My Hario scale is quite precise, but it's also got a timer on. So the moment that I pour, just as I'm about to pour my first water in, I tap the timer on my Hario scale.
Mm.
And at 30 seconds, I dump my coffee, let it drain for about 10 seconds, flip the switch back up, rest of my water debt into 270 grams of water, let it sit there for another 90 seconds as per my Hario scale. There goes the switch. Here comes my coffee.
I like it. I'm really enjoying the process, and I kind of know that now that I got into this, and that there's so many things I can do with that grinder in terms of variability.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can play with all kinds of stuff, because I do have a French press, and I would love to do that correctly. So now I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to, I got to totally change my game and see what French press is like, and then I'm going to have to do. But I'm going to sit with V60 for a little while until I
Yeah,
get a really
dude,
good.
you picked a hard one with the V60.
That's usually my that's kind of my MO. For some reason, I usually pick the hardest thing to do first, or
How
one of the
about
hardest things to do
you know
first.
when you get amazing world class coffee, it's not the time to be learning on the hardest extraction device with my coffee. And then shrugging your shoulders and saying, "Oh, I need yet another scale for Shaun's world class coffee."
Hey.
The thing to do would have been not to jump into the V60, unless, of course, you were going to practice with the V60 with atrocious Costco coffee. Then you could play with the V60. But by the time you even begin to even 3% understand V60, you'll have blown through all of my coffee. So I see it right now, but it's up to you, completely up to you. Because as I've said before, once I send the coffee, it's your coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that to everyone. So as I see it, you're at a branching point decision. You either learn the V60 on my coffee and then never get to experience the goodness of that coffee, like world-class coffee. Because in order to drink that kind of coffee, you'd have had to spend a boatload of money if you could have even got that coffee.
For sure, yeah.
So if you want to learn the V60, learn it on nasty coffee. If you want to experience world-class coffee, then get another, like right now, then look for an easier extraction device, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
I mean, you can do one or the other and they're both fine, but you can't have amazing coffee while learning on the hardest technique.
It would be like going out and buying like a $7,000 Santa Cruz and learning how to ride on it, right? Like,
that's right. Day one, son, you've got your helmet on backwards. Oh, okay, here we go.
So that is my plan right now, is that I ran a bunch of coffee through that machine anyway, and I'm going to start practicing on it and just really,
that's a good call,
run through the system. I just really wanted to try
on
the first
totally.
round,
I
and
get it. I get it.
See how this turns out. And it was still better than any of the coffee that I'm drinking.
Yeah, sure. I'm not surprised. Even if you did a bad extraction, it should have tasted like coffee.
Yeah, it was definitely, and that's when I said strong, it was a very coffee coffee,
Right.
right? Like it
Right.
really tasted
It
like
had
coffee.
flavor.
Oh yeah, yeah. It wasn't just brown water. That was it's quite the experience. I'm not like super surprised by it, but at the same time it is a depth that I had no idea about. I think that's true of a
Most
lot of
people
things.
don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right, buddy.
So I think that once you, I guess, abandon the expectations as to what you think you know, and really start at ground zero. And man, YouTube is such a just a treasure trove of
Oh,
information,
it's a gift.
right?
Yeah.
Just in everything. If you want to learn how to do something, it is on YouTube. I can guarantee you.
Oh,
So,
yeah, and to add to that, I use YouTube quite a lot, but, many different sources of research,
mhm,
but I use YouTube, of course. Now, the other interesting thing is that's starting to enter into my routine, for lack of a better term, is Seb and I were chatting real quick, yesterday evening on a subject that isn't that important, and we were saying, "Do you think that's right?" And he's saying, "Do you think that's right?" And so we're going back and forth on this. And I said, "Just give me a sec." I went straight to Chat GPT 4.0, typed in the question, got the answer. The answer was in line with what Seb and I were thinking versus what we'd heard. And
mhm,
we were kind of both virtually nodding at each other, like, yeah, that's generally in line with how I see things. So the answer this time not came from Chat GPT 4.0, but was yet another research pattern to pull from to create a fuller picture, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. And the best thing is the fact that we can look at multiple sources,
That's right.
right? And
But just more importantly, it's not can. You should.
should for sure,
Yeah.
but
As I've said to you, as I've said to many people, don't just use one
mhm,
basal metabolic rate calculator. Use several to cross reference to
yeah,
ensure that the number is not out of spec with all of the other numbers that you're not checking. You can
yeah,
pull up some random calculator and it could tell you that your rate is like 200 calories because
yeah,
they skipped a zero because their programming was incorrect. And so I always cross reference from
yeah,
several sources in order to ascertain what my general direction is going to be on something.
yeah. And for those that are interested, my BMR is 2100. So
Yeah,
not bad.
I did check after the fact, and I think you're more around the 2000.
Yeah,
I put you in at 220 pounds, 40 years of age, and 6'5".
yeah,
And so I did take a look at it, and I think 2000 is more correct. But arguably, it's almost unimportant considering that your basal metabolic rate was a larger requirement than
I was
what
actually
you
eating
were eating in an entire day. So
100%. Yeah.
if nothing else, we've got to the bottom of the fact on why Chance Burrows has not been optimal for a little while.
Less than optimal for
Less than
sure.
optimal.
And I'm actually 216, so that might be. I mean, it's not much of a difference, but
It
could
isn't.
be the
No.
yeah. So, but this actually,
No, sorry.
kind
Now, I will say one more piece on
yeah,
this because it is important. I'd
here,
like to clarify my error. I'd said to you in the live chat that I figured, and this was a guess. I didn't know because I hadn't looked at
yeah,
my athletes don't look like you. And so my guess was 1,700 cals as
yeah,
your basic basal metabolic rate, and I believe that Satch had said maybe 13 or 14, and he thought my guess was a bit too high,
yeah,
and I thought my guess might be close and maybe a touch high, but 2,000 because again you're a tall streak of cabbage,
yeah,
and so it kind of makes sense.
yeah. It does. It it fell in line with basically kind of like I didn't know where I was going with it, right? And so when I started doing the calculators and I was looking at the calculations and I was like, well, I can just do the math myself. That's not hard. Um, but there's enough calculators out there on the internet that you can
That's
just
right,
hit them, right? So I did 5 or 6. One of them came out to like 3,000, and I was like, that's
and
way
that's why you
off.
cross reference.
Exactly. And then I went to another one, and it was like 1,200, and I was like, that's not right. Um, And it was actually what I found was some of them have like an activity level that you can choose from, and
Mhm.
that will differentiate. And then I picked one. I went from low activity to medium activity, and it went from 2,200 at low activity to 3,000 at moderate activity.
Right, but that now that calculator is stepping out of spec in regards to a basal metabolic
Right.
rate calculator.
Exactly.
Now it's making lifestyle activity assumptions as well.
Mhm.
So not really not a
Yeah,
great idea.
and that's where, like, as you said, cross-referencing stuff is important. And this is,
That's right.
I was thinking about this a second ago, was the fact that back in the day, before we had the internet and before we had all this other stuff, right? If you wanted to research something, you had to go to the library,
Library.
right? Or if you're lucky enough to have the Encyclopedia Britannica, 17 volume encyclopedia
Which
that,
we had when I was a kid.
yeah, we had,
The entire series.
my grandparents had the entire series, but it was from like 1970 something. It was a little
Yeah.
out of date,
Yeah, yeah.
but that
Ours
great
would have
stuff.
been like late 70s.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So but you actually had to research it. So
Mhm.
you would go into it, and the research would be, we're going to check this book, and then it would say references from da 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 da, da, and you'd be like, oh, okay, well now I got to go check those references because make sure that all this stuff. Um, so there was more of a physical thing to it, especially if you went to the library and you were like, I'm going to look up coffee, and then you'd go to the old Dewey Decimal System, pull up the card.
The reason I like that is because it was it was in it was an intentional adventure.
Yeah.
You were pursuing information rather than it being fed to you. Like you had to consider what you wanted to learn, and then you had to go find out how to learn about it.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I mean, you can roll out of bed, trip over your own shoelaces, and within 30 seconds think that you know a lot of stuff about a lot of things because someone fed that into your head. But
Yep.
that's not how that isn't knowledge. That isn't what I consider to be learning correctly. There's a difference between being curious about the world and pursuing information versus having it fed to you passively.
100%. It's actually quite humorous because my wife and I, she comes home from work. She's a library technician, so she does research regularly, and she
Mm.
does referencing and all kinds of like finding stuff in libraries. That's what she does as her job. And she's like, people don't know how to research things anymore
Mhm.
at all. They just walk up to the desk and expect. So there was this book I saw at one point. It's got a red cover, and it was kind of talking about, I don't know, how the sky is blue.
And it's a small book, not a big book.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. What do you mean a small book?
Uh,
Well,
oh,
it's like
oh,
this kind of like.
George in the army? Yeah, of course I know him.
Yes, good old Bob from Canada. I don't know
That's
how many
right.
times I heard that one. Carl says 700 books, including 180 encyclopedias in my home collection. Good to go, man. I love
You
that.
know, funnily enough, someone asked me that question in maybe it was Daniel, maybe it was Salty Paul in my live IG chat this morning. Said wouldn't mind a tour of our home library here in the office, kind of thing. And what I'd said was, it's not that impressive. Like I don't I don't collect books to curate an impressive looking library.
Mm.
What I do have is some standbys that I can always grab if I just want to grab a random book and flick it open to a random page and see what thought it provokes. But mostly my reading comes from the internet.
Yeah,
Most of my research is online, and if I want a book, then it's out of the public library, or friends around town will just give me a book and say, "Hey, Sean, I think you should read this." And so, you know, they just give me a book and say, "I'd be interested what you think about it."
hmm.
And
So
so, you know, we don't have a big collection. The boys' books, they've got quite a few books up in their rooms.
yeah,
But as I see it, books, I mean, I wouldn't want 700 books, to be honest.
that's a lot of books. And
It's a
if you
lot
got to
of
move
books,
them,
man.
dang.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
when my Zeta died, my granddad on my mom's side, he had tons of books. He was a huge historian, loved military stuff. And I don't know how many books I saw as we were pulling them all out that just said tanks, artillery, right? And they're like that.
Yeah.
They're not small books.
Yeah,
And
what about Jane's?
right.
Jane's
Oh,
Book of
Jane's, yeah,
Tanks. Jane's.
100%. Yeah, we got.
Yeah.
I have his Jane's book now of tanks. I don't know why I need it. I don't need it, but
You
I
don't,
kind of
but
like
it's kind
having
of
it,
neat.
right? And
700 books later.
well, I'm not. I'm actually pretty good at reining that in because Amber works at the library.
Oh,
So
right. Yeah.
anything we need, anytime I'm like, I need to go see if I could buy this book. She's like, I can get it from you in the library. I'm like, oh yeah, good point. Could you get this for me? And then she will bring it home. Just like the
Yeah.
patrol.
Hmm.
You were talking about it. We were talking about it, and then yeah, I was like, hey, do you have this book? And she's like, yep, I'll get it. Brings it home. So good to go.
Yeah, it's nice.
Carl says, I'll be honest, I've only read 40% of them so far. And yes, moving books sucks.
Well, you know what, Carl? Before I said what I said, I thought exactly that because most guys that I know have got a lot of books that they have good intention of reading, that they get excited about reading. They buy the book and then it goes on the shelf, and next thing you know, you've got a lot of books that you haven't read. So
Sitting on the shelf, yeah.
it's not unusual.
Kind of makes sense, right? You get the intention, like, I'm going to read that. And then by the time you actually get done, whatever it is you're reading at that point in time, there's new stuff, right?
What I do think is it is the thought rather than the action. So someone says, hey, you should read that book. It's going to solve all of your problems. Oh, that's an exciting thought. I'm going to get that book. But then when the exciting solution or thought shows up, it's like, but I did want to watch a movie today. And so thoughts are fun. Actions are work. Thoughts and actions combined equal outcomes or solutions.
It's almost like there are entire organizations completely dedicated to actions, not words.
Something, facta non verba. But
Something like that,
it's
right?
easy to slip into, and I've done it myself. I've probably got books that I haven't read. And so it can be easy to fall into that trap. The trick is though, and I think everyone probably does it, buys a book and just never read it because they have the best of intentions. They're excited about the holy grail of all of the answers in a single book. They just never get around to reading it.
Yep.
If you see that pattern occurring, it's time to like get right with yourself and say, that's done. I ain't going to buy another freaking book until I'm finished off some of these other 60%.
Yeah. Some of them are just like, you hear great things about them and then you get into them and you're like,
for sure.
Nope.
For sure.
I don't want to read this. I slogged through War and Peace by Tolstoy, and that I knew within the first chapter that I was like, I'm not going to like this book.
I did the same thing.
I think it was, I can't remember 100%, but I think it was like the first page and a half is a description of a carriage. And that's just it. It was just describing the carriage and all the glint and gleam and the little things. And I was like, I'm not going to enjoy this.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I would enjoy it now, but I do know that when I picked it up and started making an effort into it, I was like, nope.
Yeah. So that's also part of it too. Some people buy the book and then they just put it up on the shelf. I'm like, oh, I'll get to that. And then
they might, but they probably won't.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel says, well, first off, hey Daniel, good to see you. And he says, having a yearly list of books to read is something I put into practice since my healing journey started. I know lots of people with book lists that they.
I know lots of people with lists.
Yeah, exactly. And there is lots of things that you can. I think the key is having the intentional time to sit down and read. And I think that's a big part of it for a lot of people. For myself, I know if I have a really good book, I will just read it. Like I'll just have it in my hand. I'll walk around with it, and wherever I sit down, I'm like, and then kind of carry on. But if I struggle through it, or if I really have to like force myself to read it, it gets put down a lot. And then I walk around doing other stuff. So,
but you have to form a routine. And so the idea being, if you get a exciting book that you like carrying around, And that ain't routine. That's just
No,
you being excited.
exactly.
Routine is a couple of years of doing the same, or doing a several months of same. And so the topic came up in my live chat today about how to. It was Simon Impey that said, "Hey, I'd like to read. How do I start reading more?" Was I'm paraphrasing, and actually
Mhm.
Daniel came on with a good little tip, and it was like, kind of. I think it was Daniel. Commit to 10 pages per day. Just
Mm,
do 10 pages, start a routine. And I was describing my routine of how every morning I do my best to grab a book and commit an amount of time. Sometimes it's 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes it's a couple of hours. It really depends. And again, I put up that photo of my Instagram stories this morning from 7 years ago, exactly on this day. How I was out on the back deck reading Extreme Ownership with a coffee. And so it's not like I just invented a game called Read a Book this year and now I'm pushing the excited message out there. Hey, y'all start reading. It's really good for you. I've been doing it all my life.
mhm.
So the idea is you've got to get a routine on it. And then the routine just literally becomes part of your life. So you've got to make an effort. And I think that Daniel's rule of thumb of just commit to 10 pages each day is a good idea.
That is a very good idea. Um, the yeah, Carl says I like Daniel's idea. Good call. There you go.
Mhm.
So you're good to go with that one. Winterstorm says books are great because you decide what you read, when you read it, and at what pace. You have the control when you make it intentional. Also, there are no ads in books.
It's true.
like YouTube, unfortunately, when you're sitting there learning about coffee and then they're all like, "Hey, would you like to buy a new car?" I'm like, "No. No, I want to learn about coffee." I
Well,
don't
one
need
of
to.
the things, and this is coming out of research that I was looking at yesterday in respect to neuroplasticity,
Mhm,
and the idea being that if you really want to absorb information, it's for a lot of people, it's in the read form rather than in the visual form. Like I'm a visual learner, but I learn deeper by reading.
mhm.
And so, reading is one of your senses or one of your ways of bringing in bandwidth. And that reading is an important aspect of your personal growth. Even if you're only just doing it again, 10 pages per day, it's going to make you a better person. It might not make you, it doesn't even have to make you smarter, but it's making you better
Mhm.
every day that you read. It's engaging you as a fuller person.
Yeah, it's engaging that intention, right? That
Mhm.
of you doing
Many
something.
things.
We were talking about this the other day, and I forgot to bring it up. Was the fact that the intention creates a personal promise, right? Like I am going to sit down and take the time to make a coffee today and be very intentional with it. And by keeping that promise to yourself, you gain confidence in yourself and in
Mhm.
your routine and in
Mhm.
that then reintegrates itself into the routine. So every time you succeed at it, you actually become more confident in it. And by becoming more confident in it, it's easier to succeed in it. And so it's it's just not letting those the days you miss or things happen or stuff gets in the way and you're like, it ruined my entire process. And instead of having that happen, just going, well, okay, back at it tomorrow. Carry on. That's
One of the great things about reading that I like, and this doesn't have to be a physical book. Again, I'm gonna clarify that a lot of my reading is online. So the difference between reading and watching YouTube is if I'm seeking information, YouTube is usually a better source for me because I can uptake a lot of bandwidth
yeah.
efficiently, effectively, short period of time. I can learn a lot. But with a book, unlike a video, when I'm reading through something and I go, pause for effect, let me deeply consider that. You do. Whereas on a video, you don't.
Mm,
Because the video medium is it keeps playing. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like you could pause it and go back 15 seconds and keep doing that 15-second loop of I'm going to deeper think about this video in a
I've done that a couple
cyclical
times.
loop. You can,
Yeah.
but it doesn't happen too often.
No.
What does happen with the book is the moment, or for me anyway, the moment I think, say what? I've never thought of it that way.
Hmm.
Bam, I'm on pause. and I'm going straight deep down on a dive of why do I think that? Why am I thinking that? Where am I thinking that? How can I do that better? Blah, 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 whatever. Incorporate the deeper considerations into my life.
That is a great point. And there, when you're actually reading something and you can just, oh, right, nothing happens to the book, right? The book is still
Mm.
there, nothing's changed. But now you're considering, you're thinking, oh, I wonder if that could be applied wherever.
Sometimes I've spent an hour on a paragraph
Yeah,
doing
I
exactly that.
I do love when you read the Book of Five Rings, how after his, he has this whole transformation, and he talks about the, his pieces that of wisdom that he's brought forth, and this is what you need to do in order to do whatever. At the end of it, he doesn't just state, you know, you need to let go of your, what should we call it, your possessions. You need to let go of your possessions, but he doesn't just say you need to let go of your possessions. He says that this needs to be considered deeply,
That's true.
right? And so it's leaving it to the reader, which is what I love about it, is that it's not just a statement, do this. It is, think about it. And that allows you to compile it from there. I think it's
Now, interesting to me is when he says, deeply consider this, or you should think about this. The book reader, you, I, whoever's reading that book, then gets the opportunity to think, you know what? I'm just gonna go watch some Netflix.
true.
Now, here's the difference. If you would have been standing in front of Miyamoto Musashi, or if you would have been one of his students on a daily basis, and he says something to you, and you understand either in the moment, or you have the luxury of seeing 2,000 years into the future on how Miyamoto is still impacting mankind in a thoughtful way. If if you were standing next to him at that time and he said, "Hey, deeply think about that," freaking rights, you would deeply think about it.
Yeah.
But the book in your hand isn't enough to make people think about it. And so, which is better, standing in front of the man that says, deeply think about it, or him standing in front of you, handing a book and saying, read it?
I think those are to think that one is better than the other. I don't
Good.
know.
This is good. This is what I'm
And
hoping
so
for.
my thought process is that the book enables longevity, right? You can pass those lessons forward continually. The
As
personal
can
touch,
verbal.
verbal can, but it
Well, if
gets
you're standing next to Miyamoto and he tells you the secret of the universe, you then get to pass that forward verbally. The verbal history versus the written history.
true. But that verbal history is going to change and morph between every single person that has heard it.
It's a great point.
So it's a bit iffy, whereas the written word stays as the written word, but then you have the issue of translating in different languages. And that changes the meaning of the words, because the meanings of especially Japanese versus English are very different. And then you also have the issue of how the reader interprets it based off their own cultural and integrations and all those kinds. I can't say one is better than the other. One is
No, you can't.
different.
But what it should have someone consider is there's a time and place when it's right for each
Yeah.
one. And there's a time and place for each one, for each person who's unique in each phase of their life. And so sometimes it's written, sometimes it's verbal. But the interesting thing about verbal versus written is there's the added layer of nuance. And by that, I mean, if I'm talking to you just as I am right now, I'd folded my arms about 30 seconds ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it's giving off a certain body language. And so I'm not intentionally giving off the body language. This isn't a pre planned thing. I just felt like folding my arms. But body language can change from this to this to this to this. And so all of those signals, all of those nonverbal considerations are a much richer tapestry than quote unquote just a book.
For
And
sure.
then further to the nonverbal, how I deliver the sentence of "You're doing really well" versus "You're doing really well." I mean, they're two different things, though
Yeah.
they're the same sentence. And so the verbal has more power in it, as I see it, if it's delivered from the right person at the right time, the right place, to the person who needs to hear it in a specific way. You can write a book only once in one way, and it's written for everyone. But when someone's standing in front of you, you can write the book 1,000 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. The neat thing is also is anybody that's done martial arts, has sat there in front of their instructor while the instructor is like trying to get a point across that is more about the application of whatever process they're talking about. So not just the physical movement of doing XYZ. It's about why that works and how it applies to the rest of the world and how to apply that to your life. And it's in those moments is that you have the opportunity. You have the opportunity to sit there and see physically how it works, and then also see how it's being delivered, and also see how it's being spoken about, and the authority and mentality of the person speaking is going to change how you interpret the information. So there's it can go
The verbal book is much larger than the
much
written book,
larger,
in my opinion.
100%. Yeah. And you're larger is a great word, great way to put it. It is a much larger, the verbal is a much larger book than the actual book itself.
Correct. Depending on the audience. So whoever's receiving the verbal book might think it's a comic.
True.
Versus the person who's standing next to them who's hearing the exact same verbal book thinks that it's a Britannia collection, Encyclopedia Britannica. So, there's that.
There is that. We got some great comments here. Gray Man Dead says, today's topic, coffee and books. Love it.
Funny, just before Dre put that up, I was thinking as you were talking, wow, I don't know how Chance Bros is going to describe this episode.
Coffee and books. This is perfect.
Not bad.
Thanks, Dre. You got me set up. Daniel says, indeed, time is something that people have a hard time with. That's why I did the minimum 10 pages a day. I like the 10 pages a day too, because
that's good.
If you were to set a time limit on it, like I'm going to read for an hour, you could spend an hour on a paragraph.
You
as
could.
You said, right?
You
you can, which could be good. Like you could spend an hour.
It's not a bad thing, but I don't think it's the right thing when you're starting to learn how to do it better. And so deeply contemplating a paragraph is something that you should be doing once you relearn how to read again.
I think it also, there's maybe an issue also is that you could spend an hour reading a paragraph, but you could waste an hour spending reading a paragraph.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Get lost in your own thoughts.
Exactly. And you're off somewhere else. It had nothing to do with what you're reading. And then you're
then you're thinking about how big of a badass you are.
Exactly. Right. Oh man, I am such a
staring out at the clouds.
I'm reading so much right now.
I'm reading so much and I'm getting so much better.
I am Socrates.
That's right.
Boom.
Congratulations.
Carl says, in certain scriptures, there is a word "sella" after a paragraph, which means to ponder and resting on the words written. That's a great point. I didn't know that. Daniel really likes the statement that you had made. And then he goes on with, the highlighting within a book is something I started because of Shaun and transferred that info into my book of my healing journey to review when needed. This is a really great thing too.
That's cool.
Not only there's quite a bit of literature on this, and that reading something and then writing it down reinstitutes the pathways, right? Or
that's true.
Not reinstitutes, but
no, you're right.
I can't think of the
builds.
Word. Yeah. So this is a great technique if you're really trying to learn something, or if you're studying for something or whatever. Like, read it, highlight it, write it in your own words, and that way you can collate all the information and be able to recall it easier later. As a tip for
now, it's not a cautionary note. It's just a food for thought that try not to turn reading into homework. Try not to make it drudgery. Try not to make it I've got to pick up a book. I've got to read 10 pages. I've got to break out my highlighter. Then I've got to rewrite the book. Then I've got to put it into my other book. Then I've got to make sure that, now it becomes almost drudgery.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll get to that point 1, 2, 3 months or years later. But for now, if you're just considering getting back into reading, 10 pages a day. That's all you got to do. You can read them fast. You can read them slow. You don't have to think about them. You can think about them. You don't have to highlight. You don't have to write notes. You don't have to do anything. 10 pages. See where you go from there.
Yeah. I think that's it. Starting small, right?
Small.
You start at something, you pick a goal,
achievable.
start it, make sure it's achievable, and then you just do it. And enjoy yourself doing it. Like I would say, this is my personal opinion, if you're just trying to get back into reading or you've never been a big reader, find books that you enjoy.
That's right.
Do those 10 pages, put it down, carry on.
Yeah, freaking, I love science fiction, man. I mean, that's what I cut my teeth on as a young reader. This is not easy reading.
It doesn't sound like it's easy reading.
That's not where you start.
Yeah.
You start with something that is fun and engaging, and if you're military or service related, chances are you'll probably like some Mac Bolan or some Jack Carr stuff, etc. Like there's lots of stuff out there that semi relates to our careers that has common themes of service, discipline, focus, teamwork, blah blah blah, all the usual stuff that we have commonality with, that we can connect within a book. And it doesn't have to be all bullets and explosions. So you pick your novel series accordingly, or your book accordingly. It shouldn't be a thing that weighs 10 pounds and you are dreading learning a whole pile of things from. But it also shouldn't just be escapist.
Yeah.
You've got to find the right balance for you as to where you're at. Look for something that you're going to enjoy reading, that you're going to learn a little bit from, that you'll be looking forward to picking up every day, that is going to make you better, but doesn't feel like you're becoming a PhD as you read a fantasy novel,
Yeah. 100%. I got my start into reading, I guess my development to reading was all fantasy stuff. So like Dune, Lord of the Rings,
right.
Lots of that kind of realm of stuff. But I also really enjoyed my favorite book of all time, Rainbow Six.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic book.
Tom
Love
Clancy,
it.
right.
He's a great author. Also Lee Child with the Jack Reacher series.
Oh yeah.
Also
yeah.
great.
Yeah. The show, by the way, have you seen the series on
new
TV?
One? Yeah.
Great, right?
So good. Not
so
the
good.
movies, not so much.
I know. Yeah, with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I mean,
Blech.
yeah. But the series, and
So
dude,
good.
the main actor, I've forgotten his name, but
he fits the bill.
He is large and in charge.
Have you read the books at all for them? I don't know.
Not at all. No.
So that is the character they describe. He is a massive man.
Right.
And they go into on a regular basis how big his hands are. Just how massive he is. And
well, he's perfect for the role. I mean, I love that series. And, in direct contrast to Tom Cruise and the movies, like one of my favorite scenes is when in the movie that I can recall right away, Warren Satch, is he's in the diner and the girlfriend comes over and sits down next to him, and she's the one who's going to cause all the trouble, so that the goon squad comes over and sorts it all out. And so Tom Cruise gets out front of the diner or whatever, the tavern, and he's surrounded by all the goofs that are gonna teach him a lesson or two. And like, I'm looking at Tom Cruise there, and I'm looking at those guys, and I'm thinking, oh, Tom Cruise should have got his ass whooped.
100%.
Grab that guy, not just with two hands, but in one hand, and then throw him into the dumpster. You know what I mean? Like, he ain't that hard.
He's not a big guy either.
He's a bit of a short ass, and he ain't that tough. His biggest skill is how fast he can run in that moment. And he wasn't running, which he should have been doing.
No, there's the last Reacher book I remember reading. There is a scene. I don't know if it's the same scene, but it's very similar. And it goes through. What I love about that sequence specifically from the movie was the way in which it was described, of just like, You take out the leader, and I might have to take on one of you.
Mm.
Right? If I can knock him out like that, more than likely the three of you are going to run, or I might have to
Mhm.
take on one more.
Mhm.
That's probably about it. But if I
Mhm.
don't, if we just start engaging, then I'm going to get, kicked to the curb by four dudes. Like that. That's not fun. But
But I've
it's
told the story before about my dad being on a beach when he was a young man in England, walking down early in the morning, and here come the
mhm,
gang of tough guys. And as he explained it to me, the deal is you look for the leader and you crack him first, and then you
mhm,
look at the rest of them. And as he played it out for me, that's a life lesson for me, man. I've done it myself
yeah,
since. And that I've told the story, I've told my dad's story, I've told my story to my boys, and my boys will tell that story to their boys or daughters or whatever.
yeah,
And I mean, these are not fantasy things. These aren't movie things. These are things that happen. And these are things that you need to know about on how to deal with a situation in the moment beforehand, not
yes,
figuring it out at the moment.
in the moment,
And
yeah,
so these kind of movies, these kind of series, these kind of books, they're as fun as they are, and as not escapist as they are, but they'll take
yeah,
a reader in a direction. They're also things that you can contemplate, and so as you read that scene, you're like, "What? That's crazy." At that point, you can close the book and think about what would I do at that point? How
mhm,
would I have handled it? What would I have said? And it's that if this, then that programming that you have to do before you run into a problem. You've got to have your options laid out so that when things go sideways, it's just this in the Rolodex. Brrr, option 12.
yeah. You know what I love about that particular scene also is the fact that it is prioritize and execute.
Mhm.
That like that whole principle of prioritizing and then executing on it, 100%. What's the hardest thing I can get done right now? Smash that dude.
Mhm.
Done. Right? So it's
Next.
next, exactly. Got one quick question before we shut her down. How do you guys feel about listening to audiobooks while reading the books? Ooh, I've never done that. Have you ever done that?
So reading one book and then listening to another audiobook. I'm not
I
sure if I
I'm
understand
not
that.
sure. I'm thinking like the way I'm
I
reading
don't do
it.
audiobooks.
I've done a few audiobooks. They're pretty good. I like the fact that it's like listening to a podcast, right? So
I do podcasts. I don't do
you can pause
audios.
it and you can
Yeah.
do all
Yeah,
that kind
yeah,
of
for
stuff.
sure.
So which it kind of works, but it depends on who's reading it. The one thing I found, the way I'm reading this at least, is like listening to an audiobook of say the Book of Five Rings and reading the book at the same time.
I don't
That's the
know.
way I'm reading it.
Hard to
Or
say. But,
I don't know.
like yesterday, I was listening to, Kate's, Shoot Like a Girl podcast,
Hmm.
with her fantastic guest. If you haven't listened to that one yet, buddy, if anyone hasn't listened to the most recent Shoot Like a Girl podcast, Potty, go listen.
I'm
It's
jumping on it right away.
great.
Yeah. I just
Super,
downloaded it.
super good. I don't wanna say it's the best one I've heard, but anyway, it's really good.
Yeah.
So, I was listening to that as I was reading a book, and so that's not intentional. That's not like really, really present. That's me splitting my processes and doing two things at once, of course.
Hmm.
But a certain point in the potty, I was like, oh, I got to shut the book because I really need 100% processing power on this right now. And so, the could you do both? Yeah. Is it in? Are you present with both? No,
No.
you're interoperating with both. You're not present with both. And so once things get like legit or serious or getting real, then you got to shift your focus to the 100% problem. And for
Do
me,
one or
the
the other. Yeah.
podcast wasn't the problem. It was the thing that I needed to reallocate my CPU time to because it's such a great podcast.
Yeah. I think that's a great point in the fact that again, that's part of being intentional,
Mhm.
right? If you're going to intentionally read, read. If you're going to intentionally listen to a podcast, listen to a podcast. But if that is your goal, to be intentional in that moment. If it's not and you just got stuff running in the background, okay, well that's you
That's right.
having stuff running in the background. But
Yeah,
if you want to sit and listen and be like, make sure you do it. Make sure you do it right. So well, we are almost at an hour. Dang.
that's true.
Time just died. Time flies. Time flies
Did you
on
show
here.
up with any topics in mind, or is the bank just a little bit bigger today?
No,
If it is,
I
that's
had topic.
cool. I don't care.
I
Doesn't
had
matter to me.
topics.
This was good.
The bank is bigger now
Good.
because there's a few points in here. I was originally going to talk about. Why am I switching you? I was originally going to talk about you or the disconnect between what we expect and what happens
In what
when
sense?
in so like when my personal feelings of like when I joined the army of like what I expected, and then it was not what I expected. It was
Hmm.
not. So there was a disconnect between what my expectations were versus what actually happened, and that's where we
Then
were going to get into.
it's
But
good in the bank.
good in the
We'll
bank,
get to
exactly.
it.
It's
Nice.
holding up. I got a whole list of stuff, which is great to bring up. But it's always nice to sit around and talk about coffee and books,
Or whatever, buddy. I
or
mean,
whatever.
someone had said this to me in one of my live IG chats because I used to come into my live IG chats not with an idea of what I was going to talk, but pretty quickly I'd be talking about some pretty serious stuff.
Hmm.
And then one day I just kind of jumped onto a live IG and I was chirping and I realized I hadn't really said too much at that point. I was just interacting with comments and the comments were just like casual comments or laughs or this or that. So I engaged in that and then someone said, "Dude, I really enjoyed that. That was the best Friday I've ever had because I was just hanging out with some friends." I was
Yeah,
like, "Huh, maybe I'll do the same tomorrow. Maybe I'll just dial it back a little bit and just interact with people, keep it cash." And that's what I've done kind of ever since. I don't go too hard. I don't get too serious. Occasionally I do,
yeah,
but I don't come into it like it's not like the power hour.
yeah,
I'm just coming in to interact. Most of the time it's just live chat, etc.
yeah.
So it's there's many ways to be intentional with what you're doing and there's many ways to intentionally listen and
Hmm.
etc. etc.
I do really love the chill chats. I
Mm.
mean, that's what we try to do here, right? Like
It is.
every
I mean, we
time is
get
always try to
we
get.
we get way
Sometimes
more serious over here than I do over on my live IG chats, at least from time to time, that's for sure.
I think that's probably the group effect,
I
right? We
think.
start talking, we get
Yeah,
into a topic, and then it starts developing, and then everything starts to
that's
come,
right. That's right.
goes down. So I think that's part of it. But
But I think they both have their place,
oh, for
without a
sure.
doubt.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it is very much when you sit and listen to your live chat, it's like everyone's just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, it is. Everyone's kinda hanging out. I kinda
Yeah,
dig it.
it's
And
fun.
over here, just as Seb said the other day, in a comment, he'd put up a collab photo, with him and I as we were on the microphones there,
Back in the day.
back in the day. Pivotal shockwave moment. Someone had said, a commenter had asked Seb, "Hey, is there somewhere where I can go get these audio recordings to check it out?" And basically he said, "Not sure what we're going to do with that. Maybe they'll be released, maybe they won't, but it won't turn into a book probably. But if you want to listen to audio recordings like this, go over to the-collective.ca and check it out." And he's right.
Yeah.
He's right.
I was super excited when I saw that. I was like, yeah, getting the shout out by the Sebinator.
Yeah, yeah, but, a shout
Just
out that has been hard earned
accurate for sure.
and is accurate,
Yeah.
and he should know because he's here as well,
Hmm.
like, he
Yeah.
knows the deal because 'cause he's been on it. He's part
Mhm.
of it.
The days of Lavoie.
The
The
Mondays.
Mondays of Lavoie. It's fantastic. Carl does say time flies when you were sedated too.
That's
Also,
true. That's
100%.
true.
Yeah.
Some people are sedated by meds, and some people are sedated by society.
I was gonna say some people just live sedated
Mhm.
lives, and that's yeah, kind of sad. But
Whereas
um,
we're over here turning up the rotary dial.
turning it up. I got my turning it up to. I think I've gotten to like
Turned your
5 or
grinder up
6
to an
now.
11 is what you did.
Exactly right. Grayman Dead says reading a book and listening to the audiobook version at the same time. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
never
I've
done
never
that.
done that.
I'm, I imagine it'd be cool because you could like take notes at the same time, but I don't know. It seems
Yeah, never tried it.
yeah. So let us know how you feel about it. Shoot us a message. Let me know how you're doing. For those that want to, we would. You know what I'd love to do is get that book. I know you guys are now like, eh,
Yeah, I know. It would have
seven.
been a great book, I think.
I think it would be a great book. I think maybe
Yeah.
you should just keep it in the banks and
Listen, I'm not opposed to maybe sometime in the future. He'll tell me what I have to do.
yeah.
Shaun, start doing burpees. Okay, Seb. Shaun, start thinking about writing a book with me. Okay, Seb.
Roger that. um, yeah, I think that's fantastic. Man, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall on that one because
It was a great one, buddy.
that'd be sweet.
Do you know what the funny thing is, Sora? I know we've got to close it up, but
Mhm.
I'll finish with this. At the time, I didn't even know what we were doing, or I feel now that I am who I am and how comfortable I am speaking and how have sort of connected things together a little bit better. I could have done a far better job back then if it
Mm.
was me now. And so I'm to some degree I'm kind of happy that maybe some of that isn't released because it's not all of them are fully thought out topics in some ways.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
Mhm.
The well, we shall see
We shall
as
see.
things evolve, and
They will.
we will consider deeply as things unfold,
Mm.
as things fold. Yeah.
As we learn, build, and grow.
As we learn, build, and grow here on the collective every day. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Jimo.